On audit to order, I will ask the secretary of the board to please call attendance so we can be sure we have a quorum.
Okay, so this Q is for CUNY TV. We are now in public session. So members of the Board of Trustees Committee on Audit, please respond present when you hear your name. Trustee Kevin Kim.
Present.
Trustee Robert Mojica.
Present.
Trustee Jill
Recording in
O'Donnell-Torney.
progress.
Present.
Trustee Angelo Vivolo.
Present.
Okay, Professor Ned Benton.
Present.
Professor John Verzani.
Present.
I'm about to admit the student representative. So Jasmine, welcome. Introduce everybody to our student rep, Jasmine Ramirez. How are you, Jasmine?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Terrific. And Timothy Hunter actually is going to be the student alternate, but I don't see Timothy yet. So we have a quorum. Kevin, this public committee on audit is now called to order. Pursuant to the New York State Legislature's recent extension of the suspension of required in-person meetings under the Open Meetings Law, this meeting is being held remotely via video conference with access to the public session available on the CUNY Board of Trustees website. A copy of the calendar agenda of items is also available online at the CUNY Board of Trustees website. Additional items may be added during the meeting. As a reminder, please mute so we can ensure that everyone can hear. I'll now take a roll call attendance for members of the Chancellery and other invited guests. Members of the Chancellery and other invited guests, please respond present when you hear your name. Chancellor Matos Rodriguez.
Present.
The General Counsel and Senior Vice Chancellor for Legal Affairs, Derek Davis.
Present.
Okay, Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Operating Officer Hector Batista. I see he's trying to connect, so we'll come back to him. Senior Vice Chancellor Matthew Sapienza.
Present.
Great. Vice Chancellor Richard White.
Present.
Great. Christina Chiappa, Deputy Chief Financial Officer.
Present.
Great. Sarah Montero, University Executive Controller.
Present.
Hi, Sarah. President Michelle Anderson is the COPS liaison. Don't see her yet. Okay. And Claire Eston is a partner at Grant Thornton.
Present.
Great, thank you. Hector, were you able to connect yet? Okay, great. So we will mark Hector present as well. It's all you, Kevin.
Thank you, Gail. We will now turn to the items requiring a vote today. Given that board members are participating remotely and we cannot see everyone on the screen at the same time, I will read the resolutions and ask for members to respond only if you would like to abstain or oppose an item. Otherwise, your vote will be recorded as a yes vote. If you are voting no or abstaining, please state your name and vote. Additionally, if you wish to second an item or have any questions, please state your name first for the record, and let's try to avoid speaking over one another. Action item 1A is the approval of the minutes of the October 27, 2021 meeting. I move for this item. May I have a second?
O'Donnell-Torney, second.
Thank you, Jill. Is there any discussion on the item? Okay, we will now vote. Please only respond if you would like to abstain or oppose. Okay, hearing none. That item is approved. I'd now like to take action on, I would now like to bring forth action item B, the policy calendar. Policy item B1 is the presentation and approval of the university's fiscal year 2021 uniform guidance report, which will be presented by our external audit firm, Grant Thornton LLP. I will now ask Senior Vice Chancellor Matthew Sapienza to provide an overview of the audit and resolution before turning the floor over to Claire Eston, partner at Grant Thornton. Senior Vice Chancellor.
Thanks so much, Chair Kim, and good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here today. We are presenting the audit on the Uniform Guidance Report, which is the audit of CUNY's federal expenditure program. And this is something that is an annual activity, and obviously has been made much more complicated by the fact that we now have our federal stimulus funds that, of course, we're very grateful to have and are helping our entire university and our colleges get through this challenges of the pandemic. But certainly has made this report and this audit more complicated for not only our office and our good colleagues at Grant Thornton, but also for our colleges as well, adding hundreds of millions of dollars in spending that need to be looked at. The good news is normally we bring this report to the audit committee in March every year, but we were done earlier, and we felt in consultation with, again, our partners at Grant Thornton that, we have it completed now in January, no sense to wait. We should bring it to the audit committee as early as possible. So that's what we're doing here today. So I want to thank Christina Chiappa and Sarah Montero and their team for their terrific work on this, and our partners at Grant Thornton for all their hard work as well and good guidance. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Claire Eston, our managing partner from Grant Thornton.
Thank you. And I am going to try to share my screen. I have a few slides to go through. Gail, can you confirm that you can see this?
You can definitely see it.
Oh, great. Success. So as Matt indicated, we are presenting the results of the uniform guidance audit. Before we do that, I did want to just update the committee on the financial statement audit. As you recall, we met back in October to present the results and provided our required communications. As you probably also recall, we did mention that there were a couple of open items that we needed to complete before we issued our official report on the audited financial statements, excuse me, of the university and senior colleges. We have completed those open items at this point. We actually issued our reports right before the Christmas holiday. There were just a couple of things that came up that technically we're required to communicate, and it relates to when we have audit adjustments. So there's a list of just a couple ones. As you can see, they're like just above our threshold for our quantitative threshold to report differences that were that were identified during the audit process. I would say in the scheme of things, actually very minor. So we're comfortable with the adjustments. Again, we issued a clean opinion on the financial statements. Just this is more of a formality that we needed to include this in a required communication to the audit committee. So I'll move on to, if there are no questions on this, I will move on to the uniform guidance audit, which is the focus of the meeting today. As was mentioned previously, this year we actually tested, rather than testing like we do every year prior to this year where we test student financial aid, this year we focused on testing the COVID relief programs. And it was a significant undertaking on everybody's part. We did do some testing of eligibility and verification on student financial aid at the request of the audit committee, and we didn't have any exceptions with that. So that was good news. Everybody still is keeping on top of the core elements of the requirements associated with student financial aid. And then this slide just gives an overview of first of all, the volume of expenditures that were subject to compliance and controls testing this year. It was pretty significant. You'll see it starts with the student aid that was distributed, then the institutional portion where the Department of Ed allowed you to keep a significant portion of the funds, not to distribute them to the students necessarily, but for your own purposes, whether it was to reimburse yourselves for expenditures related to COVID, or it was to replace lost revenues because of declining enrollment due to COVID, or to fund certain payroll costs. There were a bunch of different opportunities that you could use those institutional funds. You also, the last two rows are they're significantly smaller, but still important and impactful programs that you were able to participate in as well, that are all considered part of this this Education Stabilization Fund program provided to CUNY through Department of Education. So you'll see the expenditures that were tested, and that's the entirety of the program, not the dollar amount of specific samples that we tested, but the entirety of each of the programs. In the testing performed, you'll see that we tested student grants and reporting. We had no exceptions noted there. On the institutional portion, we tested a sample of payroll costs, non-payroll costs, and calculations of lost revenues and the recoveries associated with those, as well as we tested the required reporting associated with the Education Stabilization Fund. We did have some exceptions that I'll go into a little bit of detail in a moment related to payroll and non-payroll costs, but no exceptions in the lost revenue calculations or the reporting testing. And I will comment on the magnitude of the allocation of that $270 million of institutional funds that were expended by CUNY. The predominant amount was associated with lost revenue recoveries. So again, there was a piece that was associated with reimbursement of payroll costs and non-payroll expenditures that you participated in, but the majority of that $270 million was used to replace lost revenues. And within those lost revenue recoveries and the calculations and the testing that we did, we had no exceptions. So that was important to note, is that the majority of that $270 million had no exceptions associated with it. And then finally, we did do a small amount of testing in the MSI and FIPSI programs that you participated in, and had no exceptions there either. Excuse me. So just going into the exceptions that we did note in our testing, again, it related specifically to the institutional portion of the Education Stabilization Fund. We selected a sample of 100 transactions, and part of the testing that we're required to do is to make sure that the costs that CUNY is attributing to the Education Stabilization Fund program are allowable under the guidance provided by the Department of Ed when you receive these grants. That's an important aspect of our testing. We identified 7 different transactions that were charged to the federal relief programs that were considered unallowable. And I'll say there was, if you had a chance to read the details of the finding, there was some, most of it was related to situations where either there was, I'll say there was nothing that was an egregious abuse of the program, where a campus was charging something completely inappropriate to the award. It was things where maybe there was a duplication of a charge by mistake. A receipt was submitted twice, for example, and it wasn't noticed that it was already submitted once, and so it was charged twice. Or someone's payroll was charged incorrectly. Maybe it was charged at a different amount than what the approved payroll amount was for some reason. There was a situation where one payroll cost was charged sort of duplicatively by mistake. And these were all situations where we kind of got behind the facts and circumstances of each instance within the 7. We could tell that they were all, again, not egregious abuses or intended to be fraudulent. It was just a mistake, that either it wasn't reviewed correctly or just an oversight. I see a question from Chair Kim.
Yes, Claire, could you just, we looked at the 7 exceptions that you mentioned, and I had it sent to the audit committee. But number 1 biggest charge, overcharge, was the 77,400, and that was related to hotspot usage. Can you just talk about that?
Yes, sure. So you had, that is an allowable cost under the program, certainly. What happened was you were charging the grant based on a budgeted amount on a PO, and the timing of invoices wasn't exactly aligned with the June 30 year-end date. So you kind of overcharged a little bit based on the PO, as opposed to ultimately updating it for what was actually on the invoice for the hotspot services and equipment as of June 30. So honestly, that one was kind of a timing issue, because ultimately, after June 30th, your actual expenses were trued up to what was charged to the grant, but technically, as of June 30th, you had overcharged the grant by that amount because of the way that it was based on a PO instead of an actual invoice, and then the date of the invoice was not exactly aligned with your fiscal year end.
Right. So the important point was that it was allowable. It just needed to be charged to fiscal year 2022 because of the June 30 date, but it was charged improperly to 2021. So it's just going to be recharged over to 2022, and that explains the biggest portion of this 150,000 that was the total of the 7 exceptions.
Exactly, and I'm glad that you asked for the detail, because it gives you a sense of where, like I said, it wasn't egregious abuse, it wasn't complete misunderstanding of the rules. It was just, I'll say, it was the devil's in the details, and unfortunately, a lot of these things are kind of black and white with respect to whether it's in or out, allowable or not allowable. So that's a perfect example of where, if the timing had been a little different, if it had been charged on the invoice instead of the PO, it would have been fine. It just kind of came out on the wrong side of things.
And Chair Kim, if I can, I want to echo what Claire said about our gratitude with you are requesting the details and then also requesting sharing it with the rest of the committee members. And on this one, won't add anything to what Claire said in terms of the accounting, but just want to point out to the committee also, this particular purchase of hotspots, we bought thousands of hotspots for our students during remote learning, because we had heard from many of our students through our colleges and through other communications that they were having some difficulty in terms of, maybe being in a place where Wi-Fi connectivity wasn't as good. And so we did provide thousands of hotspots to our students during that remote learning period. And it is something, as Claire mentioned, is eligible for federal stimulus reimbursement. So, so happy to do so. As you pointed out, this will be a fiscal 22 charge, given the timing of when the PO and the invoice was generated.
So just to wrap up on the exception, we have to report it both as an exception in terms of like non-compliance with the requirements. And then also we are required, as you know, to test and assess internal controls over compliance, in addition to actually testing compliance. And here with these 7 exceptions, we kind of bundled them all into one finding. And also we felt as though the key control over compliance was related to proper review at a detailed level by an individual with the appropriate knowledge. That was kind of, it seemed like when we tried to get to the root cause of each of these charges and why they were kind of slipped through the cracks, if you will, it seemed as though it all came back to just inadequate review, again, for whatever reason. And I'll say it's not because people just didn't review it at all. It was just the volume of transactions that had to be reviewed and approved, and the level of detail involved was very significant. And if you think about the context of what the campuses and the finance managers at each of the campuses were dealing with while they were trying to review and approve all these expenses, it was pretty significant. And I don't want to say it's an excuse. Obviously, you still have to have internal controls, and that's why we're reporting it as an exception. But it gives a little bit of background to or some context to what was going on behind the scenes. So we did assess it as we do have to kind of classify these internal control deficiencies. A material weakness would be the most sort of egregious classification. This is not considered a material weakness. It's considered the next step down, which is a significant deficiency, and the lowest level would be a control deficiency. So a significant deficiency is something that we need to report to those charged with governance, in this case, the audit committee of CUNY. It's also referenced in when we issue our reports on the uniform guidance, there's 3 reports that we issue, one on the actual schedule of expenditures, a second one on internal controls over reporting, and then a third one on compliance. And this one is mentioned in the compliance and internal controls over compliance report, which is the 3rd report. So it is referenced there, but that's not considered like a modified opinion. It's still considered a clean opinion on internal controls over compliance. So you're still getting a clean opinion. It's just something that's mentioned there. So I see another question.
Yes, Claire, out of the sample of 100, give the total dollar amount and what percentage $150,000 is of the total dollar amount surveyed?
I apologize, but not off the top of my head. I can certainly find that information out for you and get back to you. I will take that as a follow-up item.
Matt, didn't you know the number on that? I remember you telling me.
Yeah, it was 151,000 out of $406 million. So it was less than 0.01% or something like that. So
That's my question was, of the 100 sampled events, what was the dollar amount of those 100?
of the 100 sampled.
Yeah, that's the part that I'm not sure
We'll
about.
have to, get back to you on that.
Yeah, I will. I will do that. But I guess on the entire population, at least it gives you some context that it is literally the needle in the haystack here.
Well, 7% of the cases had problems. That's not that reassuring.
We did, and to that point, when we have exceptions in our sample, we need to evaluate whether we need to expand our sample or if we don't need to, based on sort of professional standards and audit sampling guidance. So in the case of these 7 exceptions, what we determined is that we would expand the sample by a sample of 10 additional transactions. And we focused our sample on certain campuses where we had identified the original 7 exceptions to see if it was more of a pervasive issue and there was a larger issue. And in the additional sample of 10, we found no additional exceptions. If that's at all comforting to you. It was comforting to us, I guess.
I can understand why. Thank you.
So I think that concludes my remarks on the results of the uniform guidance audit. We plan to, assuming approval by this committee, we would plan to issue our 3 reports, hopefully on Friday of this week. And then be able to file them with the clearinghouse shortly thereafter.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, if no one else has any questions, I'll now move for this item to be considered. May I have a second? Somebody's got to second this.
O'Donnell Torme, second.
Thanks. So is there any discussion on this item? Okay, then we will now vote. Please only respond if you would like to abstain or oppose. All right, hearing none, this item is approved. And with no more items on the agenda, I move to adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second? I'm sure I'll get seconds from everybody on this one, right? All right, I see the thumb up from Professor Benton. I'll take that. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much. Stay warm.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.